the conflict, the ongoing conflict between the United States and Iran, and the new front between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And there is something interesting going on between Iran and Ukraine as well, because the Iranian vessel was coming from Russia to Iran, then it was hit by Ukrainians. Then later on, we'd seen a response from the Iranian foreign minister, basically saying they're going to respond. He says, he tweeted that Zelensky has attacked an Iranian commercial vessel, killing a sailor, a blatant UN charter violation done, but at Israel's behest to drag. His understanding is that the Ukrainian government is doing this because of Israel. So that's why, because Israel wants to drag Europe into the war. It somehow makes sense, because the war started between Iran and Israel. Israel attacked Iran, you remember, in June 2025. It was all Israeli agenda, Israeli strategy to attack Iran. And then you see in June 2025, and later on, they convinced the Trump administration that if we go in together, we're going to make something big, and we're going to, defeat Iran, and we're going to have a new government, a new regime in Iran, and which would cooperate with us in the region, with all our allies in the region. And I don't know if they considered all GCC countries as their allies, but that was the mindset. It's about defeating Iran. It didn't happen they started together with the United States in February 28 this year, 2026. But today, looking at the current phase of the war, you don't see Israeli fighter jets. You don't see Israeli soldiers, their forces. They're not part of the war. The war is between Iran and the United States. That's why they may want to drag Europe into the war. Because as long as other people are fighting the war on their behalf, so what would the problem with Israel? Nothing. They're not feeling the war. They're not fighting the war. The United States is fighting. You see the casualties are Iranians and Americans. No Israeli was hit so far. And this is the concept. As the Iranian foreign minister is talking about, their understanding in Iran is that the way that Zelensky has been manipulated by Benjamin Netanyahu, and we know the connection between the two. You remember how Israel was using Ukrainian forces or Ukrainian trainers in Idlib, a cooperation between the government. They were trying to do that in Syria. All these people who are in Syria today were somehow trained by Ukrainians. And because they wanted to, when it comes to the cooperation with the drone and all of this, we know the connection between Ukraine and Israel as well. That's why you see the Iranian foreign minister somehow feels maybe one of the main agendas is to drag Europe into the war. Then he says that in calls with EU High Representative Kaya Kallas and Foreign Minister Lavrov made clear that he told them that that what the freeloader in Kiev, he's calling Zelensky freeloader in Kiev, they're going to answer to what has happened between, the attack on Iranian vessel. I think they're not going to, the understanding that they're sending some sort of warning to Kiev, because if they decide they can hit some targets in Kiev, they don't have any sort of problem. Kiev is within the range of Iranian missiles. They don't have any sort of problem. The problem with Kiev is something else. With Zelensky is that the blockade, nobody's talking about it, but there is a blockade on Ukraine in the Black Sea. The connection of Ukraine with the other, they were sending a lot of weapons, everything that, they were providing Ukraine with weapons and, all of the aids that they sent to Ukraine. It's all about using the Black Sea. One of the main routes of providing Ukraine with aid is through the Black Sea. Right now, Russia is implementing a blockade on Ukraine, blockading the Odessa, which is a very important port. They have some other ports in the Black Sea, but none of them is as important as Odessa. That's why they're feeling the pressure from Russia. That's why they're attacking Iranian vessel. It could be, the agenda on their part to put pressure on Russia, because this is the communication between Russia and Iran. The vessel comes from Russia to Iran. That's why they're attacking that. This is one part of the problem. I don't see Iran consider that as a significant problem right now. They mostly want to focus on what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. And what Axios reported just moments ago, they reported that the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, recommended ending the bombing campaign around the Strait of Hormuz, arguing it had reached the limit of its effectiveness. What does that mean? It means that the United States is no longer capable of defending GCC countries, in my opinion. The war has reached to a point that the United States has no effectiveness in terms of defending GCC countries. They're using UAE, they're using Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, but the problem is, if Iran decides to attack them, if Iran gets some sort of sign that the United States is using these countries, they're going to attack and they're going to hit some targets in these countries. What are the capabilities of the United States to defend them? It seems nothing is reducing drastically. I don't know if they have decided. There were some reports that the United States is deciding if they want to intercept one of the missiles or not. This missile is headed toward an important target. That's why let's intercept this. The other one is not that much important. We're not going to intercept that. They're choosing how to or they're choosing the missile to intercept. This is the problem, because they're running short of interceptors. This is one of the problems. The other problem is the radars. The radar system that the United States has had for such a long time has been systematically destroyed by Iranian forces. They hit all these radars with missiles, with drones, not only in GCC countries, but also going to the western part of Iran, in Iraqi Kurdistan. They destroyed most of them. So they started the war strategically. And what we've learned from the Iranian side, it was that after the 12-day war in June 2025, Iran has learned a lot how to defend itself, offensively and defensively. You remember when the war started, they were arguing that the United States is hitting all those launchers in Iran. So the Iranian power has been reduced because of the launchers being hit. And then Iranians said, no, most of these launchers that were hit by Americans were, somehow decoys. But what we've learned, let me just check it out here. The United States, it was a report saying that Telegraph reported that early in the war, if an Iranian missile launcher was struck by the United States, by US forces, it would take Iran 15 hours to make it operational again. Now they are able to fire missiles at US bases in less than 30 minutes. This was reported by Telegraph. But Iranians, the same way, are arguing that they have resolved the issue with the launchers, which was one of the main problems during those initial days of war. They have, I don't know what is the solution, but they said, we have no problem right now with the launchers. Nothing. That's why you don't see the United States arguing that they're destroying more launchers, they're destroying this and that. Even in the targets that CENTCOM, the list of targets, you don't see the launchers being in that list. It means that Iran has found Iran found a solution for the problem they faced in the initial days of war. Launchers were so important for the Iranian missiles. The second point is the air defense system. The air defense system of Iran has been improving. In the latest, yesterday, there was a interview with the Iranian commander. He said that we have learned a lot during the 12-day war. And later on, in the initial days of war on February 28th, it means that they have improved the domestic air defense systems and the integration of all those air defense systems domestically. The integration was the most important task on their part. He said that we have achieved some sort of, arrangement with air defense systems. That's why you see more drones being hit. Even we had cruise missiles being hit in the southern part of Iran in the nuclear power plant, Asaluya nuclear power plant. They hit 2 or 4 cruise missiles using the air defense system. That didn't happen before. This is the new achievement, new improvement of the air defense system. They hit a fighter jet, F-35 as well, as they argued. The United States didn't confirm that. But their understanding is that they hit one of the F-35, the stealth, fighter jet, which is that Turkey tries to buy some of them. This is the complexity of the issue. Right now, many people are asking, what is going on? In the last 2 days, there were no attacks on Iran. And I would say there were no attacks from Iran to GCC countries in the last 12 hours. Iran hit in the last 2 days, we've seen Iran hitting some targets in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, but everything right now is under some sort of silence. Nothing is happening, considering the war. But it means that behind the scene, there are some talks happening between the two sides. What is that? The Iranian foreign minister said recently that the United States is sending them messages and they're receiving from the United States. But the United States is trying to put pressure on them instead of talking. It means that the United States is forcing them. You have to accept these terms. Iran said, no, we're not going to accept that. And the reason you don't see any attack happening these days, one of them is because of the logistics, because of the interceptors, missiles, and the United States is reaching to the point that there is no military solution for what's going on. It was reported that Donald Trump decided not to attack Iran in a massive manner, because you remember it was all about the United States is preparing for a massive attack on Iranian soil. And we had B-1 bombers, we had B-2, B-52, all of these fighter jets prepared for this attack. And then all of a sudden you see Donald Trump coming out and I have decided not to attack Iran because we are trying to talk with the Iranians. The problem is that the situation is somehow escalating with the negotiations. You can talk about as the war on the battlefield is de-escalating, the situation with the negotiations are escalating because the new factor in the negotiations would be the case of Yemen. Yemen cannot be removed from the calculation, from the talks, if that's happening, if that's the reason that we don't see any attacks happening. What has happened with the case of Yemen? Yemen has demonstrated. I cannot say how smart, how timely was the Yemeni blockade on Saudi Arabia. It was so accurate and timely. It was so important. The proper, appropriate moment they implemented a blockade on Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was under tremendous pressure from the Strait of Hormuz because nothing is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Then they have decided to confront Yemen. Just imagine what has happened. Saudi Arabia attacking Yemen, provoking Yemen. It reminds me of the United States attacking Iran and all of a sudden finding out, wow, what is happening? We had the Strait of Hormuz open before the war started, and right now it's all closed, and we have to negotiate with Iranians to open it up. The same happened with Saudi Arabia. They have a siege. They had a siege on Yemen for more than 12 years. And Yemen was somehow trying to resolve the issue without using the military power or without attacking Saudi Arabia. But it came to the moment that Yemen just saw this is the moment. This is the moment that you can go in and put pressure on Saudi Arabia. That's what's happening right now. And Saudi Arabia has no option, no other option. They have to accept the terms of Yemen. They have to remove the siege on Yemen if they decide, if they're serious, because Yemen has shown the capabilities. Yemen hit the targets in Aramco. Aramco is one of the most important facilities in Saudi Arabia, not for the Saudi Arabia, for the oil market. They can really damage the capability of Saudi Arabia in producing and exporting oil and other components of the oil. So the other problem for Saudi Arabia is that the United States is not that capable to provide them with interceptors. That's why you see 10 ballistic missiles going to Saudi Arabia, and you see they're hitting the targets right and left, and there is nothing there to defend them. And maybe some interceptors, but this is the shortage again, and again. The United States is out of, is running short of interceptors. That's why you don't see the air defense system in Saudi Arabia that effective. There are two options for Saudi Arabia. One of them, the escalations, continuing the war, maybe providing these proxies in Yemen to fight Ansarullah on the ground in Yemen, that we know that they have tried that before. This is they're repeating the same attitude. Are they going to learn from what they have done so far? As I said, it's more than 12 years of this war, this conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. If they're wise enough to understand that Yemen is not going to back down and Ansarullah is not going to back down, they may find some sort of solution for what they're facing in the Red Sea. If not, they're going to attack, they're going to do something. Yemen going to attack them over and over. And you see the total destruction of the Yanbu pipeline, of the Saudi port in the Red Sea. These are the options for Saudi Arabia. But what is important for Yemen, the other thing, is that they're coming to the deal between, if something of that sort happens between the two sides. When we talk about MOU, a lot talking about the deal, and many people would argue, rightly would argue, that what does that mean? It means nothing. I know that, but after all, what are the alternatives for these governments? Nothing. There is no alternative. You have two options. One of them is fighting on the battlefield, which doesn't seem that could be sustainable for the United States. That's why they're asking, again, in my opinion, they're begging for negotiations with the talks, to my understanding. But let's put that aside. The government in Iran has two options: fighting or negotiating. The fighting, they're running out of targets somehow in GCC countries. What would be the next target? Are they going to escalate that? Are they going to hit some civilian infrastructures in GCC? They would never do that. Iran would never attack civilian infrastructures in GCC countries unless the United States does something in response. In retaliation, they would do that. But when nothing is happening, they would never attack a neighboring country, even Saudi Arabia or Qatar or other countries. This is the concept. That is their attitude. They're not going to change that. But the problem is, you remember, let me just bring something else in, because in my opinion, is so important for those people who are arguing what is MOU and why. I know that MOU means nothing. I literally believe that the MOU, any of these deals, means nothing. But you remember the Minsk 1 and 2 between Russia and Ukraine, or between Eastern Ukrainians and the government in Ukraine. It was all about, because they were, in those days, they were killing the Eastern Ukrainian ethnic Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine. And then, after all, Russia has decided to negotiate with the West, at the guarantors, Germany and France coming together and negotiating the Minsk 2 and finally reaching an agreement. Later on in 2022, Russia was asking, what is going on here? They're killing ethnic Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine. What is the role of those guarantors, naming France and Germany? Later on, we've learned that was a sham. They said that. François Hollande and Angela Merkel of Germany, the Chancellor of Germany, they said that that was a sham. They were building up Ukrainian military to confront Russia. Is Russia, do you think that is naive to negotiate, to talk again with the United States? I don't think so. Because the governments they have some sort of responsibility when it comes to the foreign policy. After deceiving Russia over and over, you see today, even today, Russia is willing to negotiate, to talk with the West. Because in my opinion, these governments are responsible to their society. It's important, as time goes by, more people are getting killed. Is that going to influence your society economically, militarily, and the suffering for the people of those countries? That's why they prefer to negotiate instead of going to war. And the same attitude is happening in Iran as well. I think what did Iran lose with the negotiation, with the MOU? I would argue that Iran has lost nothing. Looking at the MOU, all those clauses, for those people who are arguing that there is no point to negotiate with the United States, yeah, there is no point, but there is no other alternative. Looking at MOU, in the eyes of Iranians, those negotiators, that was a successful sort of document. The United States was willing to sign that document. Then later on, you see the United States, what they have been doing, violating the terms of the MOU. But without having the MOU, you cannot say that the United States is violating the terms. Just signing that document, it means that the United States is accepting that in Lebanon, with the case of the Strait of Hormuz, that they have to cooperate, at least cooperate, which didn't happen, by the way. That's why I think as time goes by, they have two options. Iran feels that they have the escalation dominance. It means that they don't need to escalate.